Hello, and welcome to this week's Credible Live broadcast. As always, I'm joined today with our CEO and Chairman, Brian Fitzpatrick, and we are very excited this week to have Naomi Granger on the podcast. Naomi is the founder of the National Association of Cannabis Accounting and Tax Professionals. She is also a regular columnist for Marijuana Business Daily. She's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Cheddar TV, and on the cover of the Las Vegas Sun, among other major cannabis publications. She's here today to talk with us about accounting for the cannabis industry. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Naomi. To get us started, could you tell us a little bit more about your background and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me here today. I'm Naomi Granger. I am a CPA and an MBA. I've been working as an accountant for the last 18 years, and I've been working specifically in the cannabis industry for the last 7 years. And the work when I started in the cannabis industry, I realized that there's a lack of knowledge and education across the board in this industry, not just with accounting professionals, but with attorneys, with the state regulators. Most people don't know how to handle this industry because it's brand new. Laws are just being written. And so, from my standpoint, I realized that there was a need to start an association for accountants who want to specialize in this industry. So I started the National Association of Cannabis Accounting and Tax Professionals. We provide training, continuing education to accountants in this space so that they can stay up to speed with all the rules and the regulations, all the changes in the industry. It's constantly changing, as well as have a community to bounce ideas off of and get help and support from. I also am the founder of Calculating Cannabis, which is more of like an 8-week deep dive, which is kind of like a step-by-step business in a box, teaching accountants who want to learn how to land clients in this industry, how to land those clients, how to set up your practice, what your standard operating procedures are, everything that you need to know to get started in this space.
That is awesome. There's just so much to talk about in this area, and one of the things that it just constantly amazes me is the wonderful professionals that are coming into this space, and that background is just so important because it's like we're leveraging your powerhouse skills that you've brought to this industry, and I'm seeing this across the board now, and it's continuing to happen. So from other industries, we're really, I think, building a very, very strong and professional cannabis industries. And, I come from a different industry as well. So I'm constantly amazed. And here we are as far as in the accounting side. So, what is sort of I think there's sort of a unique role for an accountant in the cannabis industry. It's not like you're moving from a regular business. There's a lot of specialty here. So, talk to us a little bit about sort of, what is the role of accountants in this cannabis industry and how does it sort of differ?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's completely different. You are dealing with an industry that is federally illegal and state legal. So I mean, with any business, you still need to understand your state taxes and state rules and things. But specifically with cannabis, you need to understand the state rules and regulations. And those regulations are constantly changing. You need to understand who are the governing bodies in your state. You need to understand your state excise taxes, the cultivation tax, retail, marijuana retail tax. You need to understand how is your client going to be taxed. You need to understand your state seed to sale track and trace system, which is an inventory system, which is mandated by the state. It's owned by the state,
Mhm.
that is the source of truth for the state regulators. And so when they're coming in and they're auditing your client and they're doing a compliance review, which they do very often, monthly, if not quarterly, my client just has had 7 reviews this year already. And we're
Wow.
you know we're just in yes. And it's various things. It's not always finance related, but a lot of it's compliance, making sure that things are in line with the rules and regulations. But as an accountant, when it is finance, if it's something about inventory, you need to make sure that you've done the proper checks and balances. You've documented everything. If there had to be some spoilage, if you had to do inventory adjustments, that everything is being done properly. And so you need to understand what's required of your client from that state level.
So it sounds like one of your recommendations is to have a separate office just for the auditors. Because it sounds like it might be a little bit more common that an audit is happening. I do have to ask you this question because it's just on everybody's mind. This whole thing with rescheduling and 280E, what's your thought about the timing? When is that gonna happen as far as getting the benefit of this 280E thing going away as a result of, hopefully soon rescheduling?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure how familiar your audience is with 280E, but I'll give a little bit of a background on what even that is.
Please.
So 280E tax is, if you look it up, it's a federal tax code, and it was implemented back in the 1980s to combat. It was part of the war on drugs. The purpose of it was they didn't want illicit businesses to be able to take advantage of the normal business deductions that a normal business would be able to take. And so, what the tax code states is you are not able to take any deductions or credits if you are involved in trafficking a Schedule 1 or a Schedule 2 controlled substance. And
Mm.
so it's important to understand, well, what is a controlled substance? There's a Controlled Substances Act, which schedules drugs from 1 to 5, with 1 being the most prohibitive. They're saying that there's no medical benefit, it's highly addictive, it's just the worst of the worst. And that's where cannabis currently sits, as Schedule 1 drugs, above things like hydrocodone and some of the things, we're having other epidemics going on in this country. Fentanyl, that does not sit on 1. It sits on, I think, 2, or it sits on 2. So it's more destructive in the eyes of the government than a lot of other drugs, and the government is now looking back and saying, hey, this is ridiculous. It definitely doesn't need to be on Schedule 1. There's obviously medical benefits. It's obviously not as addictive as we once thought. So let's relook at the scheduling. And so the proposal from the Health and Human Services Department last year was to move it from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. And if it falls in Schedule 3, then that means the definition of 280E goes away, because it only applies to Schedule 1 and Schedule 2 controlled substances. And so 280E, when it says no deduction or credit allowed, that means if you think about a traditional business, you have your revenue that comes into the door from selling. Let's look at like a retail store. You're selling gadgets, you're selling different things. And so you have your revenue from selling those products, and then you have your cost of acquiring those products. So whatever wholesale price you paid to get the item in your store and then to resell it, you have your cost. And then after your cost of the actual item, cost of goods sold, you have all of your other expenses to run your business. There's rent, there's payroll, there's utilities, there's all these other they're called operating expenses just to run your business or run your retail store. So a normal business, you have your revenue, you deduct your cost, and then you deduct all of your operating expenses, and then you have a net profit, what's left over after everything's paid for, and you pay taxes on that net profit. But with a cannabis business, you have, because of 280E, you have your revenue, you have your cost of goods sold. So whatever it costs, the wholesale cost to get that product into your store. And then you have your gross receipts, and you're taxed on your gross receipts, whatever your tax rate is. And then after you've paid your taxes, now you get to pay marketing, advertising, payroll, professional services, rent, utilities, all that stuff comes in afterwards. So if you can imagine, that's almost like they can be double, triple taxed, because let's just look at an actual numbers. Let's say both businesses made $1 million in sales, a legal business and a cannabis business. Both businesses had a $500,000 in cost of goods sold in order to get those goods, to get those sales. And so now we're sitting at $500,000 of gross profit. Both businesses had $250,000 in operating expenses, rent, payroll, utilities, all of those things. So both businesses have a net profit of $250,000. And let's say the tax rate is 20%. A legal business will pay 20% of $250,000 for for federal income tax, but the cannabis business will pay 20% of $500,000 for federal income tax. And so that's where the disparity lies. It's impossible to run a business when you're paying taxes on your gross receipts rather than your net profit.
Yeah, and that's a great explanation, and I think even with that rescheduling, this 280E is going to take a little while to get the benefit of. So let's say it,
Mhm.
if it's not really cleared to, let's say, the end of this year, it's 2026 looking back into 25. Would that be about right?
Yeah, so now there's a lot of questions around that. What I've heard and what I've seen, rescheduling has happened before. In the past, the last case, it took 8 months, and they're thinking that this is going to take longer than that. So we're well into a
Mm.
year from now that we're estimating that we're going to see anything happening. And then once it's rolled out, we need to understand how all of these different government agencies are going to roll out, specifically the IRS. Are they going to, obviously, our stance as advocates of the industry, we say it was incorrectly scheduled in the first place. So this just should be retroactive until the beginning of our business, our legal business. Um,
Hmm.
we doubt that that's going to be the outcome,
Good luck
but
with
the
that.
if the yeah, but the IRS could say, let's say it happens July of 2025. They can either say, hey, it's effective today moving forward. So now we have a split year. They could say it's effective January 1, 2025. So the whole year of 2025, you get the benefit. Or they could say it's effective someday in the future, January 1, 2026. So it just depends on how they roll it out and what date they choose for this law to take effect for our clients.
That's a great clarification and great explanation. Thank you for that. And I when I look at sort of this lack of capital that's sort of happening in the industry, I mean, I think that's one of the drivers. Because
Mm.
it really impacts the financial economics of a business, and investors are also concerned, obviously, with the federal illegality of the business, and which drives a lack of interstate commerce, right? So, I can produce all these goods and services, but I can only sell them here in the state. I can't, so my addressable market is completely limited, from what a normal business would do as far as selling, their goods and services across line. And
Mhm.
then we end up with sort of a oversupply, which drives price erosion. And then it also creates ongoing illicit market competition. So it's I mean, we're just making the problem worse. It's like, and
Right.
and thank you, by the way, for being in Washington as much as you are, and being an advocate of this industry, because the work you're doing there, particularly from somebody like yourself who truly understands the economic impact of this industry. I mean, I
Mhm.
really applaud the great work that you're doing. So thank you for that. And but it really drives, this lack of capital. And then, you've got accountants that are sort of watching this growth space opportunity, but you've got all these challenges. What do you think? What advice would you give to other accounting professionals that are sort of looking at this space as that might be an interesting opportunity, but yet we have all these challenges? So, what is your advice for some accountants in entering the space?
Yeah, so you touched on a lot of topics in that one question. So this industry is widely underserved. One of my accountants just dropped us a note today that she did a presentation for the state of Maryland, and there's over 150 businesses that are looking for accountants. And I've also done presentations with the state of Maryland. Her presentation were to cannabis business owners. My presentation was to the Society of CPAs in that state. And both of them, when I spoke to the accountants, all of them said, absolutely not. I don't want to touch it. it sounds too complicated. I don't understand it. And I would say maybe 1% of the audience was actually interested in moving forward and looking into this industry.
Wow.
And so you have 1% of the accountants wanting it, and then you have 150 new businesses that need accounting. So it's widely underserved. So any accountants who's up for the challenge and who would like to take a stab at this industry, there's a lot of opportunity. I feel like it's one of the easiest industries that I've been able to attract clients and tap and get clients. So I feel like it's one of the best industries to get into.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, and what I was talking about before that is all the typical challenges that a CFO, normally doesn't have to face with. In this industry, they do. And even technically, just from an accounting perspective, I actually sit on a group of private investors, and I get involved in the due diligence of cannabis businesses, plant touching cannabis businesses. And one of the things I've noticed, and maybe you can touch a little bit on this, is it's sort of all over the board how cost of goods sold are calculated. Like, when I see the software business, it's almost like, there's a common way you look at COGS. In this industry, it's like all over the place. Like, what's the deal there? What's going on there? And why is that? Does it have something to do with what you talked about earlier about the whole tax
Yeah.
situation? Since we can't
Yeah,
take
absolutely.
the SG&A, let's like power it up into the COGS. What's going on there?
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it. So, there are other, so you have tax code 280E, but then you have several other tax codes that kind of govern what can be considered cost of goods sold. So there's 471-3 and there's 471-11, and one is for manufacturing and cultivation, and then the other is for the reseller.
Mhm.
And so the cost of goods sold for the reseller is a lot more prohibitive than the cost of goods sold for the manufacturer. And so the definition is that if you are physically changing the plant, so if you're growing it, or if you're creating concentrates or edibles, if you're changing the physical component, all of the cost associated with that manufacturing process or cultivation process are considered cost of goods sold. But with a reseller, even though you need to have a space to store this product and sell this product, and you need bud tenders, and you might need to package the product and all that stuff, if you're not physically changing the product, you're just putting it on a shelf and making it look pretty, that stuff is not considered cost of goods sold. And we only have some like Harborside court case. We have a couple of court cases where all of that was denied. And so there is another tax code called 471C, and 471C came about in Donald Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act back in 2017, and it kind of gives us an avenue to create our own system, our own accounting, establish our own accounting policies, and say, hey, some of these costs we are going to consider inventoriable cost. And so it just depends. We don't have any court case, like this hasn't been challenged in court. And so we don't have any case law to govern this. So it depends on the risk tolerance of the client, if they are wanting or willing to implement that tax code. And then you need to have an accountant that really understands that tax code and is properly documenting this change of method of accounting, and also documenting why certain expenses were taken. And we've actually, my organization has had conversations directly with the IRS and some of the examiners and asked them, like, well, what's reasonable? 80% cost, 50%? Like, what's a red flag when you're doing these audits? And their response was it just has to be reasonable. So as long as you're properly documented, hey, this bud tender spends 100% of the time only working with a product. This room is our vault, and that's where we store all of our product, all of the, rent for that portion of our building. All of that should be deductible. So as long as you're properly documenting that, then you can get a little bit more creative and take some deductions for your client.
Have you ever tried to defend reasonable in a lawsuit?
I'm not an attorney, so I will never I
Well,
will never try to defend that, but I do know some real smart attorneys who have defended it.
yeah, it's like so the question is, so normally in other industries, like when you talk about a standard like reasonable, you can point to like the AICPA guidance. Like,
Mhm.
is there any such thing that exists in cannabis for AICPA?
No, yeah, so the AICPA has very limited guidance right now for the cannabis industry. And you really need that to come from the IRS. And
Right.
they have a website that that's dedicated to the cannabis industry, but it doesn't give you, it's not black and white yet. We're
Yeah.
still in a gray area until we start getting more people who want to challenge this in case law, in court cases. We really kind of are, just doing the best that we can.
So here's what I'm hearing. What I'm hearing is somebody like you and the people you train and the people you bring in are critical to this industry because it really is specialized knowledge that puts you in high demand because of these complexities. Because if you get it wrong, then there's serious consequences. So I think
Mm.
and to me, like whenever I see that happening in an industry, I say like that's the opportunity, right?
Right.
That's the opportunity to get in there and plant yourself, pardon the pun, as a, sort of that specialized knowledge to be in high demand. And then, you can actually be part of a significant growth potential as this industry sort of continues to mature and more, licenses are granted and then also be part of the movement as we move towards federal legalization, which is admittedly it's going to take a little while to get
Mhm.
there, but it gives you that ability to sort of specialize and differentiate, and you provide a platform for that education. You provide a platform for that certification in this specialty, which again I applaud you. I think that's phenomenal because not only are you helping the companies you're working with, you're helping this industry be better, which in turn also helps to attract capital, right?
Right.
In these specials. I think it's a really cool um ecosystem that just kind of helps improve the industry. So, when
Yeah.
you're talking about I was talking to a couple CPAs and they were sort of like breaking out the cross and holy water because they were concerned about, like, am I going to lose
Yeah.
my license? Am I going to lose my certification? Like there seems to be some real concerns about this. So talk a bit about about the compliance side and the importance, from how critical this is for sort of supporting and maintaining and protecting your CPA license and what safeguards
Yeah,
that.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'm a CPA and I've been a CPA for 18 years, and I've been in the cannabis industry for 7 years, and I still have my license. So it all boils down. So the first line of defense is to contact. If you are concerned, contact your state society of CPAs and ask them what is their position on you working with a state legal business. And if you're in a state that doesn't have a cannabis program, you still contact your state that you're licensed in, and see if it's okay for you to work remotely for cannabis businesses as long as they're licensed. The advice that I give the CPAs and the accountants that I work with is to make sure that you're dotting your I's and crossing your T's. We need to be sure that that's all they're doing. Like, you want to make sure that they are legally licensed, their license is up to date, they are only dealing in cannabis. There's no other types of funny business going on, things that are illicit going on, because with any business, even if it's a car wash, if something else is going on, there is a risk that you can lose your CPA license. So you need to make sure that you're documenting all of your financial positions that you're taking, and all of the cash ins and cash out. But at the end of the day, you are the bookkeeper, you are the accountant. So
But
it
I want to
falls
address
on
but I
that.
want to
Oh,
address
go ahead.
something you said about that though. So So, because what I've heard is some of the state boards of accountancy, they have not issued clear guidance, indicating approval of CPAs actually operating in space. In fact, I think it was New Mexico when they first required businesses to have audited financial statements of the cannabis companies. There was like no CPAs to do the work because the state board didn't approve it. So it's like we've got this conundrum. Do you see that like more rapidly improving, or like how does that happen? If the boards aren't really making commentary on it or giving guidance?
Yeah, so I would press the CPAs of that state to contact that board and press them to issue something.
Okay.
If they're requiring this audit, then yeah, contact that board and make sure that they've issued an opinion on what you can and can't do. I know the AICPA dropped a document, but it's so old, like 2017, and it hasn't been updated. We need an updated document. I feel like there's a lot more, like the social stigma has dropped a lot since I've started, and there's a lot more acceptance, especially with the federal government putting this on the agenda to be rescheduled from 1 to 3. There's going to
Mhm.
be a lot more social acceptance. So we've just got to constantly keep reaching out to those agencies to see what their position is.
So and that's why I think the work you're doing is so important, because it really can help set the framework at the state level, but it also gives guidance at the federal level in prepping them for what are the things that have to happen to really to move this forward in a meaningful way. So, I happen to think that any accountant that wants to get in space needs to contact your organization and needs to get involved in this. So, how would somebody sort of work with you if they're interested in the space? Because we'd love to direct people, your way. So, talk a little bit about the organization and how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. So it is the National Association of Cannabis Accounting and Tax Professionals, and because that's a mouthful, we
Yeah.
do go by the acronym NACAT Pros, NACATPROS. .org is our website, or at NACAT Pros on all socials. You can find us. And we have over 200 accountants across the country that are involved in the organization, and our organization is divided up into regional committees. And so if you are in the Northeast region and you want to get involved, you can join the organization, you can join that committee. And the purpose of those committees is to get to stay abreast of what's going on in all the states in the region, which states are coming on board, if there's some changes to the rules and regulations in that state, and also to network and to provide training and education to license holders in that state. And so there's a lot of local trade associations all across the country. They have business owners and operators who are looking for financial advice. They also don't understand the tax position, and a lot of times they can't just hand it over to somebody. It's their business, so they need to understand if their accountant is doing their job correctly. And so we go out there and we speak to these organizations in a group setting and talk to them and help them understand how to put together cash SOPs, or how to get banking, or how to understand 280E, or what's going on if cannabis is descheduled or rescheduled. What do you need to do next for your business? So that gets our members in front of business owners and kind of sets us up as the authority in this industry.
Seems like you need to have like a matchmaking service, 'cause I often it's like I'm talking to CEOs and business executives, and they're asking us, "Hey, do you know anybody who can help out in our accounting group?" And I because, to me, I think it's just absolutely critical that you have people that are trained in this industry that understands the nuance. You talked about all the reasons. It's regulatory, it's getting COGS right, it's inventory management. Like, how do you really get your balance sheet right if you don't know where your inventory is and and the COGS associated with it and the movement of those costs? So a lot involved.
Mhm.
Naomi, you're a powerhouse in accounting. You're doing a lot of great things. You're an advocate. And I just continue to be amazed at some of the wonderful people I'm really meeting in this space that are true professionals. When some people think about the space you're in, it's like, oh, you're working with a bunch of stoners. No, I'm working with a lot of professionals and a lot of
Right.
great people in this industry. And it's these people like you, professionals like you, and the many that we've been interviewing and talking to, they're going to move this industry forward. So we've got a webinar that we'll be announcing shortly about where's the money? Like, where's all the money going in the capital? I think that's going to be an exciting thing, because it's when you look at all these issues and about the professionals that are needed to surround this industry and the confidence that's required to bring this industry back. It's all part of the movement. So, Naomi, keep doing what you're doing. We're big fans. Thanks for joining the Credible Live broadcast. And next week, I think, Taylor, we've got Brother Wolf that's going to be on board. We're talking
Yes.
about it's kind of controversial. We're going to be talking about cannabis and Christianity.
Mhm.
And so, we cover a lot of interesting topics, but respectfully, we'll be covering that topic as well next week. So tune into Credible Live next week. And Naomi, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.